Let's talk about the DuPont analysis. This was an approach made popular by the DuPont Corporation, and it's really about calculating return on equity, which is simply net income divided by average equity. But the DuPont analysis breaks that down into three components. Net profit margin is net income divided by sales, and this tells us how effective a company is at converting its revenue into profit. When they multiply that by asset turnover, this tells how effective a company is at using its assets to generate sales. And then multiply by equity multiplier, and this talks about the leverage that a company is using. So you'll notice we can cancel out sales, and it's net income over average total assets, which is actually a return on assets. We'll look at that here at the bottom in a moment. We could also cancel out average total assets from the bottom to the top, and then we're left with net income over average equity, which again is the definition of return on equity. But by breaking this into parts, we can tell if two companies have exactly the same return on equity, which component or components are driving that, and is a company doing better simply because they have different leverage, or because they're actually better at converting sales into profit, or converting assets into sales. Let's consider this dashboard as a way to look at the effects of the different parts of the DuPont analysis. So we'll start with net income over sales, and then look at asset turnover, which is sales over the average total assets, and then look at the equity multiplier, which is the average total assets over the average equity. Now, before I multiply those together, let's just make sure we got the math right and say, what would the net income over the average equity be? And we're expecting an answer of 10.41%. So if I said this times this, there's also a product function. That was easy enough. We get 10.41%. So I don't want to mess up that border, so I'm going to copy, paste special, all except borders. And what I see is that the return on equity for this firm is relatively constant at about 10.45%. And then the pieces going into that are changing. Net profit margin and net income over sales is actually going up. So the company's becoming a little bit more efficient with their sales. Asset turnover, how well they're generating sales from their total assets, is also going up very, very slowly. But the equity multiplier, the average total assets divided by the average amount of equity, is going down. All those happen to work out that our return on equity is staying relatively constant. So let's play around with that a little bit. First, let's look at a debt to equity ratio. And we'll use total liabilities for debt, and see that that ratio is about just a little over 1, which means we're using a little bit more debt than we are equity right now. And then the return on assets, the net income divided by the average assets divided by, is about 5%. And so how do those numbers change over time? Return on assets is going up a bit. Debt to equity is going down. So let's think for a minute about how these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines can be changing while return on equity is staying about the same. And the short answer, I think, is that we're doing well. We are generating positive net income down here and positive retained earnings even after we pay dividends. That's flowing through to the retained earnings on the balance sheet, and it's growing our equity. So if equity is growing and debt staying the same, then debt to equity is going to go down. If equity is growing, then to balance, cash or some other asset must be growing. And we see that return on assets is actually going up. So if assets are growing, but return on assets are going up, then our net income must be going up faster than our assets. This is all incredibly dry to talk about, but in the next video, we'll see what happens if we issue debt or equity, and we'll start making some charts to make this dashboard a little bit more interesting.